Two faces side by side, same bone structure, same jaw angle, same orbital depth, the same specific architecture of a nose that belongs to exactly one family on Earth. One of them looks like the other's older sister. That's not a metaphor. That's the photograph. Documented, filed, returned to many times from a researcher running a longitudinal study on facial aging in twins. She'd photographed pairs every 5 years, starting in their late 20s. She expected variation. Twins don't live identical lives, so some visual drift makes sense. What she hadn't anticipated was how decisive it would look by the time the twins were in their late 60s. Not subtle. Not one of them looks slightly more tired. She's looking at what reads as a decade of additional living, inscribed across identical cheekbones. And then there's this detail, which I'm going to ask you to hold in the back of your mind. One of the twins had spent most of her adult life driving. Long routes, morning, deliveries, afternoon routes, the steady accumulation of hours with the left arm on the console, the left side of the face angled toward the driver's side window. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone would have noted as an exposure risk, just the ordinary geometry of a life spent in a vehicle, repeated enough times that it added up to years. Hold that. Because the real question this photograph raises is not a lifestyle question. It's a logical one. And it's one I want you to think through with me, because once the logic closes, there is no undoing it. If two people share 100% of their DNA and they age differently, what exactly is doing the aging? There's a version of this conversation that most people carry around with them, and I don't mean that dismissively. It's inherited, really. Passed down alongside family stories about who looks like whom. The grandmother whose hands you recognize in your own. The photographs from 50 years ago, where your uncle looks uncannily like your cousin looks today. We've always attributed aging to genetics, in the same way we attribute eye color and height, as something received, not something participated in. That belief has a warmth to it, a kind of resigned comfort. The cards are dealt. You play the hand. If your parents aged gracefully, you allow yourself a certain quiet optimism. If they didn't, you try not to think about it too much. But identical twins disrupt this entirely, methodically, across decades of collected data, and not in a way that permits comfortable exceptions. So let's evaluate it the way it deserves. 3 criteria, not 10, not a list, 3, because 3 is enough to reach a verdict, and verdicts are what we're here for. First, does the genetic argument actually hold up when applied with precision to the twin evidence? Let's follow it until it runs out of explanatory power. Second, are lifestyle differences an adequate explanation? Or are they pointing at a mechanism they don't themselves explain? Third, what is the actual mechanism? Because once we have the mechanism, the verdict becomes obvious. And after the verdict, there's a framework I want to leave you with. Not a supplement recommendation, not a product list. A framework for reading your own face the way a geologist reads a rock formation. The genetic argument deserves a fair hearing first, because it's not irrational. It observes real patterns. There are clearly families whose aging trajectory runs in recognizable lines across generations. Across large populations, heritability estimates for specific facial aging features, the depth of nasolabial folds, the rate of skin laxity, certain textural changes, run somewhere in the range of 40 to 60%. That's not negligible. Genetics is genuinely involved in how you age. The argument runs into a wall the moment you introduce identical twins. Identical twins share the entirety of their genome. Not most of it, not the significant parts, all of it. They originated from one fertilized egg that divided. There is no genetic variable between them, which means any difference you observe in their faces, any difference at all, is definitionally not genetic in origin. This is not a controversial interpretation. It's a logical constraint. If variable A is held constant between 2 different outcomes, variable A cannot be the cause of the difference between those outcomes. That's not biology, that's basic logic. And it applies here without exception. And yet, By their late 60s, many identical twin pairs show facial divergence that independent researchers consistently rate as significant. Raters presented with twin photographs can reliably identify which twin appears older, and that identified difference correlates directly with documented differences in the twins' lives. Not randomly, with structure. The twin who smoked is identifiable. The twin with higher UV exposure is identifiable. The divergence isn't scattered evenly across possibilities. It tracks specific inputs with the kind of consistency that tells you something is actively writing it. The first objection people raise here is reasonable. What about random developmental variation? Twins don't always split perfectly in the womb. Small stochastic differences in early development could introduce divergence without requiring any environmental input afterward. Fair. Random developmental variation does contribute something, particularly in early life, but it fails as a complete explanation for the pattern we actually observe. Developmental noise produces early, relatively fixed variation. It doesn't continue to accumulate steadily through a lifetime. What the twin studies show is that facial divergence increases with age. It is greater at 60 than at 40, greater at 40 than at 25. That is not the signature of noise. That is the signature of a signal being continuously added to by something operating throughout the lifespan. Something is actively writing the difference, continuously. Think about what happened to orchestral recording in the early decades of the 20th century. When recording engineers first began capturing performances on physical media, they made an uncomfortable discovery. The same musicians performing the same written score produced outputs so radically different across different recording environments that critics sometimes questioned whether they were hearing the same work. An ensemble recorded in a cathedral, with its long reverberation time and distinctive harmonic envelope, sounded nothing like the same ensemble in a dry acoustic studio. The score had not changed. The notated music was identical. What had changed were the conditions imposed on those notes as they moved through the world. What twin studies are demonstrating in biological tissue rather than an acoustic wave is the same phenomenon. Same genetic score, two different acoustic environments. By 60, you can hear which room each twin spent their life in. The question is, what constitutes the room? The lifestyle explanation is where most of this conversation stops, and I understand why. One twin smoked, one didn't. One had chronic UV exposure, one spent decades in northern light. One maintained a relatively stable body weight across the years, one experienced significant fluctuations. One slept consistently, one didn't. All of this is real. All of it produces measurable facial differences in twin pairs. The smoking correlation alone is reliable enough that trained observers can often identify the smoker from photographs without knowing any other information about the pair. But here's what's unsatisfying about resting there. It describes the inputs. It doesn't explain what the inputs are doing at the cellular level that makes identical genetic instructions produce different outputs. Sun exposure ages you is an observation, not a mechanism. And the gap between observation and mechanism is the entire question. There's a case I keep returning to. I'll give it to you without identifying details because the details aren't the point. The pattern is. Someone in a line of work requiring long daily drives, years of it, left arm on the console, left side of the face at a particular angle relative to the driver's side window, receiving ultraviolet radiation in the frequency range that passes through standard automotive glass. Not acute exposure, not a single beach vacation's worth at once. The kind of cumulative, unremarkable, daily input that no one would think to document or counteract because it arrived as an ordinary part of an ordinary commute. Repeated until it had accumulated into something measurable. By their late 50s, a clinical examination of this person's face found something quietly remarkable. The left side had undergone more cycles of UV-induced cellular stress and repair, more collagen cross-linking events, a texture that was not older, that's not quite the right word, more worked over. as though the same material had been run through more processing cycles on one side than the other, different enough that, in a photograph, the two halves would be estimated as belonging to faces that had aged at different rates. Same DNA, same genetic instructions in every cell on both sides of that face. 5 inches of car interior separating two entirely different environmental histories. That is not a lifestyle story in the ordinary sense. The person didn't choose to age one side of their face. They chose an occupation, sat in a particular seat, and the mechanism translated that positioning into something measurable in tissue. So the lifestyle explanation is real, but it's the delivery system. The question is, what is it delivering? Epigenetics. I want to be precise with this word because it's been borrowed by the wellness industry and stretched until it's nearly meaningless. Let me use it the way biologists use it. Epigenetics refers to changes in gene expression that occur without any alteration to the DNA sequence itself. Your genome, the full sequence of your DNA, remains essentially stable throughout your lifetime. What changes is the pattern of which genes are being expressed, at what levels, in which cells, in response to which signals. The mechanism involves chemical modifications layered on top of the genome, methylation of specific sites along the DNA strand, acetylation of the histone proteins around which DNA is wound, regulatory RNA molecules that govern transcription rates. These marks are added and removed in response to environmental inputs, not in response to catastrophic events, but to chronic, low-level, repeating signals that the cell eventually interprets as conditions requiring adaptation. Wait, before I give you the molecular version of what this looks like in practice, let me give you the geological version, because the geological version makes it immediately obvious in a way the molecular one alone cannot quite achieve. In 1957, a formal survey concluded that the River Thames was biologically dead. Not metaphorically, literally incapable of sustaining fish life above the most primitive microbial level. The Thames, which had been London's defining waterway for 2,000 years, had been rendered lifeless by industrial effluent, untreated sewage, and thermal pollution from riverside factories. The river's geology was unchanged. The riverbed, the gradient, the ancient drainage basin, exactly as they had always been. What had changed were the conditions imposed on that substrate. By 1974, salmon were documented in the Thames for the first time since the Industrial Revolution. Same river, same underlying geology, expressed completely differently because the inputs had changed. Your face is the Thames. Your genome is the riverbed. What you are doing to the river determines what the river can support. In identical twins, this is measurable rather than metaphorical. Researchers have taken tissue samples from both twins and read the epigenetic marks, the methylation patterns at specific genomic loci, the histone modification signatures, and found direct correspondence between those marks and documented differences in the twins' lives. The twin who smoked shows distinct methylation signatures at genes governing oxidative stress response. The twin with chronic sleep disruption shows altered marks at genes involved in inflammatory regulation. Cumulative UV exposure writes its own epigenetic signature at genes controlling collagen turnover and repair cycling. These marks compound. Each year of differential environmental input adds to a growing written record. Measurable epigenetic divergence between twins appears by around age 40 and stratifies significantly by 60. The longer two people have lived differently, despite starting from the same genome, the more distinct their epigenetic signatures become. Now, the objection I anticipate here: isn't this just a more sophisticated way of saying that choices matter? That lifestyle is destiny dressed up in molecular language? The distinction is not semantic. Epigenetic inputs are not limited to voluntary choices. They include chronic inflammatory signaling from dietary patterns inherited from a culture, not selected from a personal menu of options. They include the cortisol dysregulation from 20 years of financial insecurity. They include the altered inflammatory cycling from a decade of nighttime caregiving for someone you loved. They include the UV that moved through your car window every morning for 30 years of commuting. These are not all choices, they are inputs, and the genome responds to inputs, regardless of whether you consciously selected them or whether they found you. You didn't inherit your face's future from your genes. You are writing it. You have been writing it since before you knew that was what you were doing. The record on your face is not a sentence handed down. It's a document still being drafted. So what do you do with this? Not a supplement list, not a specific intervention. That would require knowing your individual situation, which I don't, and which no general video can approximate honestly. What I can give you is a framework. 3 questions that function as a diagnostic before anything else. The step that needs to come before any intervention. Conversation. Actually reading what's been written. First question, where is my face aging asymmetrically? Look at this honestly. Most people have never done it systematically. A photograph in even, neutral light. Left side compared to right. The depth of the nasolabial folds on each side. The texture across the 2 cheeks. The area below the eyes. The jawline where it meets the neck. Asymmetry is not a cosmetic concern. It's forensic evidence. The side aging faster is receiving more of something. More UV. More gravitational load from sleep position. More repetitive muscular tension from a habitual expression or a postural pattern. Asymmetric aging has a vector, and the vector is pointing at the source. Second question, what are the repeating environmental inputs on the faster aging side? Which way do you sleep? Which side of your face turns toward your car window, your desk lamp, the brightest light source in the room where you spend most of your evenings? Which side do you rest your chin or cheek on when you're fatigued? The inputs aren't only topical. The inputs aren't even primarily topical. That's a bigger statement and I want to be careful about it. But the evidence supports it. Chronic unilateral jaw tension from a postural asymmetry, from a habitual chewing preference, or from stress that you happen to carry on one side of your face creates asymmetric mechanical loading on the fascial tissue in that region. Asymmetric loading means asymmetric rates of cellular turnover and remodeling. Your habits have a spatial signature. That signature is readable once you understand what you're looking at. Third question, of the inputs I've identified, which ones are actually modifiable? Not all of them will be. Your commute is your commute. Your job is your job. You are not redesigning your life based on epigenetic principle. But the framework isn't asking you to do that. It's asking you to distinguish between the inputs you're genuinely stuck with and the ones you can intercept, even partially. A UV blocking film on the driver's side window costs almost nothing and changes the conversation your car is having with your face every morning. That's what understanding the mechanism looks like when it becomes practical. The goal is not reversal. That framing belongs to a different, often dishonest conversation. The goal is authorship. Understanding that the record is still open, that the pen is partly yours and has been all along. This applies to anyone who has been treating their face as a fixed inheritance rather than an active document. And it applies differently, but no less, to someone who has been focused entirely on topical interventions without ever mapping the upstream inputs those interventions are trying to correct. Back to the photograph, the researcher. The 2 faces with identical bone structure that had become, over decades, different versions of the same person. And the detail I asked you to hold from the beginning, the driver, the long routes, the left side of the face angled toward the glass year after year. Here it is. When cases like this appear in the clinical and observational literature, and they do, quietly, without fanfare, in case reports that don't make headlines, what they show is a natural experiment conducted on a single substrate, 1 genome, 2 environmental histories, separated by approximately 18 inches of car interior, 2 different sets of epigenetic instructions, written continuously over decades onto identical founding text. The left side had been receiving additional instruction every morning. The same cellular machinery that existed on the right side, same collagen-producing fibroblasts, same melanocyte population, same inflammatory response pathways, was operating under a different set of expressed gene programs. More cycles of damage, more cycles of repair, more accumulated methylation at stress response loci, more transcriptional history written into the tissue. The face on the left wasn't less fortunate than the face on the right. It was more annotated. That is what aging is. Not the degradation of a fixed program, the accumulation of a written record. Identical twins give us the clearest demonstration of this that biology offers, because they remove the variable everyone uses to explain away the evidence, genetics, and leave you with only the truth. The environment writes on you. It wrote on you before you understood this. It is writing on you right now. The only question worth taking seriously is, knowing this, knowing that the record is still open and the inputs are still being transcribed, what do you want the next line to say?